Comedian Omid Djalili went on a very bizarre attack against Zack Polanski. Now, Zack Polanski initially tweeted this. Israel killed 160 children in a strike on a school. It's so dystopian and grim. Even worse, that the BBC looked to murky the waters. But Omid responded and said this. Nothing is proved yet, Zack. The fact that you are spreading misinformation is appalling for someone in your position. To date, no one has been allowed to see any evidence of casualties or even the site itself. The regime says it's America or Israel. The Americans say they were nowhere near the area. Here's what Iranians inside Iran say. The IRGC blew it up themselves to fill it up with dead bodies of children they've kept on ice, hidden away in cold storage from the January slaughters, to put on display in order to blame their aggressors. The fact that we have not seen the evidence yet is a red flag, as we know the regime would have gleefully paraded those images on television and all over the internet. Most probably, they were caught on film transferring the bodies, hence why there is now a media blackout on this story, as well as full internet blackout. As Iranians, we know how this regime operates. We're talking about new levels of evil. So any narrative like the one you are pushing, Zack, actually supports the regime in their don't care how many die as long as we stay in power quest. For the love of God and humanity, please stop. Hashtag Iran massacre. Hashtag Iran Israel war. That might be one of the most deranged things I've ever heard. Yes, the Iranian regime had bodies of children in freezers, and then they were to plant them in a school and then blow it up and blame it on Israel and America. But they were caught in the act by doing it. Okay, so here's the thing. If they were caught in the act, where's the footage of them being caught in the act? He talks about the fact that Zack Polanski provides no evidence of the US and Israel bombing the school, and then comes up with his own story that's made up in his own head, that Iran did it themselves with the bodies of dead, cold children. Again, you can't talk about evidence when you come up with your own story, concoct your own story with no evidence, and you just say, well, Iranian insiders. Which insiders? Who? It's crazy. Now, this was obviously called out, and it was called out by Owen Jones. The Americans bombed the school, Omid. It's extremely disturbing if you continue to double down on claiming otherwise. And attached to the tweet is an article from the New York Times with analysis that shows the school was hit by the US. Now, by the way, Pete Hegseth was asked about, what was going on with the school. I mean, apparently the US and Israel hit the school. Now, if it wasn't by the US, Pete Hegseth and the American government would be like, yeah, it wasn't us. It was Iran, definitely. They just would have said that. But the fact that Pete Hegseth said, we're looking into it, we're going to investigate it, means obviously it was them, right? It's the same with Israel. Whenever they commit a crime, and obviously often they lie to somebody else, but if they can't lie, they just say, we're going to look into it and we're going to investigate it. Now, Omid is acting so deranged that even Katerji called him out. It's supremely disappointing to see this from Omid Djalili. I'm 100% with him on not trusting the regime, but all of the credible reporting points to this being a US strike that massacred those school girls. Wanting something to not be true is no excuse for whitewashing this. Now, you have to remember, Oz is extremely horny for war, by the way, and he's a massive propagandist, but even this was too far for him. But it was Omid's reply to Owen Jones that had me almost falling off my chair. I encourage everyone to read this pro-regime New York Times propaganda article with the headline "Analysis Suggests," which itself is non-conclusive. No one is suggesting it didn't happen, but as to who was responsible, it is extremely disturbing that the New York Times and BBC Verify quote sources only and exclusively from the Islamic regime as evidence. So we have still not seen concrete, independently verified evidence, and that is a fact. If you want to trust them, Owen, that's on you, but Iranians don't. We know how this regime operates. They have previous thousands of examples, but most recently, how about the massacre of tens of thousands of their own, simply for the act of protest? With the internet cut out immediately after the bombing, so eyewitnesses in Minab were silenced. Is this really journalistic integrity? Hashtag Iran massacre. Hashtag Iran-Israel war. Why does he keep using hashtags? Now, it's really strange because what he's saying is, again, Owen, we have at best lackluster evidence from this, therefore it can't be true. But once again, he's providing an alternative with zero evidence. And by the way, when it comes to reporting, you lead on the evidence. Not everything has to be verified as a fact to report on. That's why you say, reports say this, person A claims this. And you want to say that, well, the BBC verify, and the New York Times are just, echoing claims from the Iranian regime, unquestioned. I mean, are you going to say that about Israel? I mean, literally, the entire mainstream media will be like, this happened because Israel said it. I mean, that's just what reporting is. And by the way, analysis suggests, that is analysis. It's some form of evidence. But I can't believe he said that the New York Times is pro-Iranian regime. A Western paper which has provided pro-Israel articles is pro the Iranian regime. Kevin, some people have had collective delusionment with this war. What do you make of Omid's interjection?
If I ever get dunked on by Oz Katerji like that, get me to a Dignitas clinic because I don't want to live anymore, frankly. That is tragic to see. Omid Djalili is a person I've had respect for as a performer. His comedy, I think, has always been pretty good. I've enjoyed a lot of his stuff. But clearly he should stick, I think, probably to comedy and not political analysis. It doesn't seem his particular strong point. Now, as a person who is an Iranian man himself, I can understand why he has strong passions about this topic. Obviously, that makes sense. But when you allow your political biases to just run amok like that, you're obviously going to end up with absurd suggestions like this. And then the bizarre backtracking where he says, no one's suggesting it didn't happen. No, you're suggesting it didn't happen. You're suggesting the Iranian government planted frozen dead children from January. If they needed dead bodies, there are loads of them. America are killing them in their hundreds at the moment. Why would they need to? Why were they deep freezing children, Omid? What are you talking about, you mad bastard? It's so silly. You don't need to do this. You can be against the Iranian government and oppose the bombing of schools as well. Those are two completely compatible positions, actually. They're both positions I hold. I don't like the Iranian regime. I didn't like the now late leader of that country. And I don't think that bombing children is a good thing in general. And more specifically, I don't think it's a good way of, bringing down the Iranian regime. If anything, it's going to toughen the people to say, fuck you, to the very people who are bombing you, as has always been the case in every fucking bombing in the history of the world. Literally, if you drop bombs on people, it makes them more stoic, not less. That's the way it goes. But in terms of the conspiracy theory, I wasn't aware of this story before you sent the script thing earlier today, because I try and avoid Twitter because it's now just a cesspit of Nazis and child porn. Who'd have thought it? Elon Musk, a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, creating an app that creates child porn. Crazy. Anyway, so I wasn't aware of this story, but I read through it and I just thought, this is madness. This is like confirmation bias and conspiracy theory run amok, and it's a damn shame to see. But ultimately, he doesn't have any political power, so I find it difficult to take it very seriously. It's just a sad old man being sad and old, I think.
Yeah, but this is the thing, right? And of course, none of us support the Iranian regime. Of course, it has issues with killing their own protesters. It has issues with democracy, especially issues with women, right? But
yeah, absolutely.
We have seen the most hysteria when it comes to the corporate media. Saying 60,000 people were killed. Ian Dale, I'm sure it's Ian Dale, suggested that millions of people were killed by the Iranian regime. These aren't verified, by the way. And it's important. It's important to have it, have the facts at play here. It's kind of like, on October 7th, right, all the wild claims that 40 babies were beheaded, there were mass rapes. None of that was true, or rather, there was no evidence to suggest that. And when you point that out, so people would add some kind of moral argument to that and say, well, you're disgusting. And it's like, no, but it's important, right, to get the facts out there as journalists, right? So it's important to say that there's no evidence that Iran bombed their own school, whereas that there's evidence that the US and Israel did it, right? And of course they killed their own, but there's no evidence that millions of people that were killed. We have to understand that the numbers matter. But of course, a lot of the media want to make Iran, again, they're a bad regime, but they want to make them sound this bad. So do you know what? For those that are anti-war, just this time maybe we can support it, which is funny because every single time we want to go to war, it's like, okay, I get it. We shouldn't go to war. But maybe this time, which is not... Nigel Farage has said that. Nigel Farage has been like, oh, this is very different to Iraq. They always say that every single time.
Well, exactly. The Liberal is against every war except the one that's currently happening.
That's currently happening, yeah.
Just as they're in support of every civil rights campaign except the one that's currently happening. It's a repeated pattern, rinse and repeat every generation.
Yeah.
But I think there is important context, right? And it's not whataboutism, because I'm not suggesting that we should be friends with any of these particular countries. It's the fact, it's the hypocrisy of it, right? You mentioned quite rightly that Iran has a democratic deficit. And that its dealings with women are particularly grotesque, and its putting down of those protests in January was brutal as fuck, obviously. But like, we're literally launching from sites in Jordan and Qatar, countries with equally, if not worse, human rights records.
Yep.
We are very, very friendly with other autocratic nations like Saudi Arabia, who, if we really care about human rights and treatment of people and all the rest of it very well, then we should probably look into Saudi Arabia, because literally last year they executed via crucifixion a person who was convicted of witchcraft. The idea that we're friends of human rights here in the West is ludicrous. Pull the other one.